Hello, my name is Ford. I am presenting my research proposal that is part of my capstone for my class of Capstone in Psychology, taught by Kelly Gorbett through Southern New Hampshire University. In this presentation here, we're going to talk through several different points, beginning with just an introduction regarding my research proposal, as well as the research questions that are going to be included in my proposal. We will also cover the existing literature that's been included in a literature review of the previous research that relates to the proposal I am discussing today, as well as any potential participants I would like to include in this research proposal and the methodology regarding that, as well as the methods itself, including my research design and other kind of related talking points related to the methods, as well as kind of the uh, hypothesized results of the study and kind of the outcomes related to that as well. And finally, we'll also discuss ethics as well related to the study, as related to the field of psychology and ethical standards in that field. So beginning first with the introduction and research questions. Um, my research that I'm proposing here focuses on the relationship between mental health and incarcerated persons. More specifically, the relationship between incarceration and the impact that this has on the mental health of individuals incarcerated, especially those that already struggle with maybe some pre-existing mental illness issues, such as some form of mental disorder. Um, this kind of research I am proposing because there is a significant incarceration population within the United States, and mental health is becoming a more discussed issue within the culture and society of America. And with this kind of greater discussion and the fact that there is a large incarcerated population within the US, there doesn't seem to be much research regarding the impact that incarceration can have on mental illness. And so I view this as a significant gap in the research. And so that's why I'm proposing this research today. The goal of this research would be to also highlight any kind of shortcomings of incarceration regarding its ability to rehabilitate those struggling with mental illness. So obviously the goal of any form of incarceration is to rehabilitate offenders and ideally integrate them back into society after their sentencing. And so this study is kind of aimed at examining the impact that incarceration has on mental health, as if there's indications that incarceration doesn't support mental health or maybe even detracts from mental health. That kind of suggests there's maybe some limitations to the rehabilitative abilities of incarceration. And so the target audience of this presentation is policymakers, as ideally this research can be used to help make some reform and some changes within the U.S. law and legal system to help support individuals that are incarcerated or legally involved to support their well-being and their kind of mental states, to ideally rehabilitate them and lead them back to being reintegrated back into society in a productive and positive way that benefits not only them but society as well. And so some stakeholders or people that may be affected by this research are legal professionals, lawyers, law enforcement, judges, as well as individuals that maybe work and operate in the um, psychological field, such as treatment professionals, counselors, psychologists, psychotherapists, psychiatrists, as well as obviously the individuals that struggle with mental illness, and the incarcerated population will be also individuals that are affected and impacted by this research and any potential outcomes of this research as well. There are 6 research questions included with this potential proposal for a study. The first one being, does incarceration increase mental illness symptoms? The second one is, does incarceration add additional mental illness symptoms onto the pre-existing ones? The third research question is, does the effect of incarceration differ across diagnosis, gender, age, and other demographics? Research question 4 is, can any coping methods be identified to moderate any identified relationships between incarceration and mental health? Research question 5 is, are diversion programs more effective in decreasing mental illness symptoms and decreasing recidivism? And research question 6 is, does prison-based treatment mitigate any identified effects of incarceration on the mental health of inmates? And so these are the six kind of questions that will be guiding the research I'm proposing, as well as kind of the goals is to answer these six questions as well through the research. Before getting into any of my kind of proposed methodology or approach to this current research I'm proposing, it's important to also consider any of the existing literature that already is being discussed and is out there regarding relation to this topic of incarceration and mental health. So the first one here that we're going to review is regarding a study that relates to research question 4. And so this study was a study that examined the impact of coping strategies relating to individuals that are in the incarcerated population. And so they kind of examined through this research the relationship of coping strategies in the prison setting and the impact that has on mental health issues. And so they examined the impact of healthy versus unhealthy coping strategies in the prison setting. This was conducted through the Arizona Department of Corrections. Um, and this study demonstrated that incarceration was associated with higher levels of stress, lower physical health, mental health, and emotional health. So this study did kind of demonstrate that incarceration had negative impacts already on the mental, physical, and emotional well-being of individuals. And the study also found that dysfunctional coping or kind of unhealthy coping strategies were related with a greater amount of mental health issues, whereas individuals that were kind of taught or already knew functional coping strategies or kind of healthy coping strategies, those individuals were not associated with any kind of mental health issues, suggesting that there was some benefit to having healthy or functional coping strategies in their toolbox to kind of manage any of the adverse effects of incarceration during their stay in a incarcerated placement. And so this study kind of concluded here that prisons should be designed in such a way that they support the use of functional coping strategies. That way, the incarcerated population has some tools in their toolbox to mitigate any kind of potential negative effects of being incarcerated. In terms of kind of just the structure of the study collected longitudinal data through semi-structured interviews, and it is worth noting that the sample only consisted of incarcerated men, so there is a limitation regarding gender to this study, as the results obviously may have a little bit of difficulty being generalized to incarcerated women, for instance. It is also important to note that there was no conflict of interest being reported regarding this study. Just some background information regarding this literature as well. The study utilized the SCL-90R as an assessment tool to determine the effectiveness of coping strategies on the psychological well-being. So that is kind of the assessment tool that they use to measure the effectiveness of the strategies being implemented. In terms of some analysis that was conducted, there was regression modeling that was utilized to kind of assess the results and analyze the results of this data that resulted from the study. In terms of the strengths of this study, some kind of just ones to highlight is that this was a longitudinal study, so it had a kind of examined the long-term effects of incarceration and kind of looked at more long-term data, which is kind of a strength there, is it's more long-lasting results to kind of examine, long-term effects to look at, and is a strength overall. The SCL-90R is considered a valid and reliable assessment tool, and so the results of I should say the data that's collected from using the SCL-90R can be considered pretty reliable and valid data, considering the tool itself is considered pretty reliable and valid. And so as well as it's also important again to kind of highlight that the results of this article is relevant to research question 4 regarding the proposed research I'm discussing here today. Um, some weaknesses to also note, as kind of already previously mentioned, this study only included men as participants, so the generalizability, especially regarding gender, is kind of limited. As well as this study didn't include any information regarding the mental health outcomes of those who are incarcerated with pre-existing mental illness or some form of mental disorder. And so this also kind of just is a weakness, but also highlights the fact that there is a gap in research regarding relationship between incarceration and mental health for those that already have some mental illness in their kind of background. The next study here, this study examined kind of the relationship between mental health and diversion programs. This study does pertain to research question 5 of this proposal. And so this study kind of examined the fact that those are involved in the criminal justice system, legally involved individuals, if you will, they have a greater risk of suicide. And so this study discussed the relationship between depressive symptoms, alcohol use, and suicide attempt history. And through their research, found that there was a positive relationship between these variables. And so it was found that individuals that have a history of alcohol use and are reporting some level of depressive symptoms, whatever those levels may be, um, creates a scenario where there's a increased risk of suicide. And so this study kind of concluded that suicide risk assessments should be completed whenever alcohol use and depressive symptoms are present and reported, as those are indicators that there is a greater risk of suicide. Um, and so this study has kind of just some background information again regarding this study. This study utilized the Psychiatric Diagnostic Screening Questionnaire, PDSQ, which is often considered a very valid and reliable tool. There were no conflicts of interest reported, as just a general note to keep in mind, as well as the study suggests a potential lack of efficacy in pretrial jail diversion programs. As kind of previously stated, right, this study examined those diversion programs and found that there were, even in these diversion programs, risks associated with suicide, risks associated with depressive symptoms, risks associated with alcohol use. And so there is the potentiality that even diversion programs aren't as effective in regards to addressing mental health as one would hope, because that's kind of the design of them to be a better alternative to jail or prison or some kind of incarcerated facility placement. So something that will also be pertinent and important to discuss and examine regarding this proposed research included in the study that I'm discussing today. Some other just pertinent information to know about this study. There were 274 participants recruited for this study. They were all recruited through an urban pretrial diversion program in Rochester, New Hampshire between 2007 and 2009. Participants that were involved in the study had charges such as misdemeanors or nonviolent felony charges. Um, some variables that were measured, or excuse me, variables were measured by some monitoring that was occurred in the community, as well as making sure that individuals included in the study were attending their pretrial diversion program, which met 5 times per week. The PDSQ was also used to measure depressive symptoms and severity of substance use. As previously stated, that's considered a tool that has strong psychometric properties. And then self-report questionnaire, a self-report questionnaire is also implemented to gain a measure for suicide attempt history. The final kind of study included in the literature review here for this study proposal is this one here. This study relates to research question 3 for the proposal that we're discussing today. This study looked at the lifelong impact of incarceration from a young age, so kind of the incarceration of youths and minors. This study found that there wasn't ethnicity differences in arrest and incarceration. It found that children who are arrested are disproportionately African American, suggesting there's kind of an ethical component to the arrest of youths. This study also found there to be mental health implications for being arrested at a young age. The study found that individuals who are arrested before the age of 25 have a greater number of depressive symptoms and suicidal thoughts as children. And so this study kind of argued in their results that there should be less arrests of children, as this would likely lead to an improved life health outcome for each individual that this impacts. Again, just some background information for this particular study. This was a longitudinal study that utilized empirically valid methods. Um, it also included a very large sample size of 10,641 participants. It's also important to note as well for this study that there was no reported conflicts of interest. Some also just important information to know regarding this study. This study utilized pre-existing data collected by the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescents to Adult Health. Some measures that were included in the survey and data collection were general health, mobility and functional limitations, and death in regards to health measures. In regards to mental health measures, measures included depressive symptoms and suicidal thoughts. Some strengths of the study. The topic of the study examined kind of the impact of incarceration on youth and life outcomes. So obviously there's a very direct relationship to this study and its findings to the proposal that we're discussing today. This study also utilized longitudinal data. Again, we already kind of spoke about the benefits of longitudinal data previously regarding one of the other studies, the benefits that that has, as well as this study, again, is pertinent to research question 3, discussing its kind of benefit to being discussed and applied to the proposal that we're discussing today. Some limitations to this study. Recall bias was reported as a potential concern regarding this study, as well as the researchers were unable to establish a temporal relationship of arrests and health status for individuals who were arrested before completing the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent to Adult Health Survey. As well as it's also important to just note that the impact of an individual having pre-existing mental illness as a participant was not discussed, again, suggesting a lack of addressment in the field, suggesting a research gap. Moving on to discussing participants. Participants for this kind of proposed study I am discussing today, we want to ideally recruit individuals that are legally involved in the U.S. criminal justice system. So this could be individuals that are going to jail, going to prisons, are involved in a jail diversion program or other form of diversion program, such as maybe mental health court, drug court, or other form of diversion program that is out there. Individuals will be recruited when entering the diversion program or correctional facility. So ideally, you want individuals that are just entering their incarceration or just entering their program. And upon kind of entering their diversion program, their correctional facility, and then also deciding to participate in the study, participants would then be categorized into 4 different groups for the purposes of the study. Those groups would be individuals involved in a diversion program, individuals who are incarcerated and are participating in prison-based treatment, or those who are incarcerated and are taught healthy coping strategies. It is also important to note, and we will discuss this a little further along as well, but it's important to note that obviously there is some limitation to random assignment regarding this kind of research design, as there is the limitation of we can't really assign an individual to the diversion program group, for instance. That is entirely dependent upon volunteers volunteering for that. And so something to also just keep in mind in terms of the limitation piece. Unfortunately, this is a limitation that has to kind of be accepted, however, as due to ethics, obviously, right? Ethics have to be kept in mind. And so we cannot ethically assign someone to a diversion program and then put them in a diversion program versus assigning them to being incarcerated. And so we are dependent upon volunteers from each group volunteering to participate in the study. Getting into the methods here. After the recruitment phase of these participants, informed consent will be obtained. Obviously, we want to make sure, especially with this population, that we're conducting ethical practices. And so part of that is making sure that participants know that they are volunteering, that they have kind of the freedom of choice participating in the study, and that they are able to withdraw from the study at any time. And so we want to make sure that that is um, made right from the get-go with informed consent and making sure that individuals have an informed decision, the ability to make an informed decision about participating in the study. Um, Once again, regarding kind of the grouping, once a participant decides to join the study, they'll be kind of placed based off of their background into one of four categories. Um, and so, kind of with that being said, if an individual volunteers to be part of the study and they are entering a diversion program, they'll be placed in the diversion program group. If they are entering a, a form of incarceration and volunteer to participate, they'll be put in the incarceration group, and kind of on and on. The one kind of exception to that is for a portion of individuals that volunteer to participate that fall into the incarceration group. A selection of them will also be randomly assigned to the top healthy cat coping strategies group to make sure that all four groups are have representation, as well as the fact that um, that is a setting where we can randomly assign. In the case of diversion program, in the case of prison-based treatment, obviously no, we cannot randomly assign that for ethical reasons, as well as determining if someone should be in diversion program or incarceration. We cannot determine that for ethical reasons. That is based off of volunteering, but we can ethically assign individuals to be either just kind of I guess you could call it kind of a control group of those who are incarcerated versus those who are incarcerated and taught healthy coping strategies. That's a place where we can randomly assign ethically. Um, it is also kind of important to note as well that there is an initial assessment that would be included in the participation in the study. So this would kind of ask participants about their gender, age, mental health history, legal history, other pertinent demographic information, so that we can kind of examine those differences, as well as look at the impact of maybe having a particular mental illness or mental diagnosis or things of that nature, as well as other, again, demographic information like ethnicity or culture and things of that nature as well. But the kind of the primary measure that will be collected or used to collect data, I should say, will be the administration of the MMPI-2 with an initial assessment upon their kind of a person's entering of the study. And so that will be kind of collected as a baseline result, if you will. And then after about 6 months, a 6 month period, the MMPI-2 will be administered again. And that way, it can be kind of measured the difference in scores to determine if whatever intervention is at play, how that impacted the individual's measured mental health as measured by the MMPI-2. Results of the proposed study. So there is some data analysis that will occur after the data is collected. It is important to note that data collection obviously will be primarily used through the MMPI-2 data that's collected, as well as the study questionnaire about legal history, mental health history, all that kind of good stuff to kind of identify all the difference in demographic information. It is also important to note that the collected data will be stored on a private server to make sure that confidentiality is maintained. Um, Obviously, if there's any kind of paper or thing that arrives from this study, all the information will be de-identified to maintain this confidentiality, as again, this is a study that will follow ethical practices, and confidentiality is a large part of that. Once all the data is collected and stored, the data will then be interpreted by SPSS to conduct statistical analysis, and things like descriptive statistics will be calculated, such as standard deviations, means, medians, all that kind of stuff to kind of summarize the data, better understand the data, as well as then the Kruskal-Wallis test will be conducted to allow for a comparison of before and after scores of the MMPI-2, as well as be able to compare these median scores between the four groups included in the study. It is also important to note that the MMPI-2 is considered a sufficiently valid and reliable tool, and so this implies that the results and the data kind of collected will be reliable and valid information to conduct analysis on. In terms of kind of spreading out these findings, disseminating these findings, the intent of this study here that's being proposed today obviously is to lead to a publication, ideally in a psychological journal, some form of psychological publication. It's also very possible that this this research that's being proposed, I should say, will be utilized to enact change regarding the rehabilitation of those who are incarcerated. That's kind of the goal, the intent, as previously discussed. And so it is possible as well that the paper or the findings of this proposed study could also be presented in such a way that it's being presented in the legal setting to support any kind of reform or rehabilitation efforts by policymakers or anyone else that is in a position that they may be able to make some change based off the findings of the study. Discussing ethics a little bit more directly, we already obviously have discussed them quite a bit throughout this presentation, but discuss them a little bit more directly. Throughout this study's process, the APA, the American Psychological Association's Code of Conduct, has been kind of and will continue to be the guiding light, if you will, in terms of the ethics piece of this study, of this proposal. The APA Code of Conduct does include 5 general principles and 10 sections regarding ethical related concerns and ethical standards. Some sections to kind of highlight is Section 3, which includes a discussion of the ethical standard to avoid harm. Obviously, here that's really important as the sample included in this proposal for the study are legally involved individuals who do have kind of a history of being exploited and taken advantage of. And so making sure that this study is able to avoid all potential mental, physical, emotional, all kind of forms of harm is really kind of important. And so with that kind of being said, this study does have a very limited risk of harm to participants. The primary kind of involvement of participants directly are basically 2 evaluation sessions, one for that kind of initial administration of the MMPI-2 with collecting that other demographic kind of information, as well as 6 months after another administration of the MMPI-2. And that so the risk of harm is thought to be quite low. In terms of confidentiality, that also is a discussion in the APA Code of Conduct in Section 4. That's also obviously, again, being considered throughout this study and this proposal as participants will be de-identified and any kind of presentation, paper, information that results from this study, as well as during the study's process, information will be encrypted and stored in secure means to prevent the lack of privacy regarding participants' private information. In Section 3 of the APA Code of Conduct, it also discussed the importance of avoiding multiple role relationships. It's kind of the importance of making sure that individuals involved in the research aren't personally related to any of the participants. And so that will also be something that is upheld and during this study, as well as ensuring that friendships aren't created or other forms of personal relations aren't created through the research team and the participants, as that can cause all sorts of ethical issues if they do develop, as well as obviously impact the potential data and the results as well. And so that will be something to also be upheld and has been upheld thus far through the proposal process as well. It's also important to discuss informed consent. We already kind of spoke about that a little bit as well, but just to kind of talk about it again, informed consent is important to make sure that, again, this is a vulnerable population, so making sure that any participants willingly and knowingly have kind of their ability to enter the study and exit the study based off kind of their decision making process. And so making sure that everything about the study that they can know about, they know about, and kind of giving them the freedom to enter at their free will and exit at their free will, and not and ensuring that there is no kind of coercion occurring um, throughout the recruitment process or anything like that. Because again, it's a vulnerable population. It's important to make sure that nothing like that is going on. To speak about that concept even more specifically for a moment as well, inmates are considered a special population, again, because they have been a vulnerable population in the past, because they have been exploited historically, due to just kind of the research ease of recruiting them. Um, this has kind of led to a history of coercion and making inmates kind of feel like they have to participate in studies when in reality they don't have to. It's their kind of free will, as well as it's often the case where inmates don't even actually get to kind of reap any benefits of the study in the end. But in the case of this study, the study is aimed at increasing the well-being of individuals who are incarcerated. So there actually would be a lot of beneficients of being included in the study, as well as it is historically often difficult to maintain confidentiality when including participants who are inmates, just because in kind of the incarcerated setting, if it's kind of common knowledge where the room is, if you will, for where participants go to meet the researchers or the evaluators or anyone involved with the research. Anytime a inmate is kind of seen going to that room, the rest of the um, inhabitants of that incarceration facility will be able to kind of deduce that that individual is participating in whatever study is being conducted in whatever room it may be. And so this study will kind of do everything it can within its reasonable means to make sure that this isn't the case, to maintain individual confidentiality and maintain individuals' privacy throughout the study process. It is also important to note kind of the ethics related to the use of the MMPI-2. As kind of previously stated, the MMPI-2 is considered sufficiently valid and reliable. To kind of go over the reliability, it has a reliability range of 0.16 to 0.93 and a test validity of 0.34 to 0.92. It is also important to note that the MMPI-2 meets the Daubert standard, and the Daubert standard is the U.S. kind of legal standard for expert witnesses admissibility of methods. And so that kind of means that then MMPI-2 would be admissible data in the legal setting in the US, which kind of just further corroborates the fact that the MMPI-2 is sufficiently valid and reliable. As well as it's also important to note that in the APA Code of Conduct, it is a standard that methods and assessment tools are sufficiently valid and reliable. And so the fact that the MMPI-2 does meet that kind of shows that the MMPI-2 meets the APA Code of Conduct standard for inclusion in as a research tool as well. So just some kind of wrap up, some conclusion here. In this presentation, we talked about kind of the introduction, research questions regarding this proposal, this study that ideally will happen. We also kind of went over any of the existing literature that relates to this topic, the proposed participants, the proposed methodology, kind of the proposed results of this study, as well as ethical concerns relating to the study as well. And so I just kind of want to take this time as well to just reiterate that this study really can be impactful and would be impactful for the benefit of the incarcerated population as well as those who are legally involved. As right now, there's evidence to kind of suggest that there are a lot of issues and lack thereof of the considerations for the well-being of those who are legally involved. And so this study would kind of highlight that lack and could be used to implement change and implement reform that not only benefits the well-being of those who are legally involved, but the goal of incarceration and the legal system is to rehabilitate offenders to integrate them back into society. And so if that change that comes from potentially a study like this occurs, it in theory will benefit all of society and all of us as well. And so this research could kind of be the beginning of a lot of reform and change that benefits everybody, all of us in our society here in America, if not the whole world. And so um, this is a very powerful study that could really lead to a lot of benefits for very directly to the legally involved individuals, but if not just them, the entire kind of society as a whole as well. Just to kind of note also the references and resources that were utilized for this presentation, for this kind of proposal that was put together. These are those references, and so this is kind of where a lot of that background information came from, those facts, those declarations of information, all of that came from these scholarly sources listed here as well. So I do want to just take this time to thank you for taking the time to hear out this proposal, hear out this consideration for a potential study to commence. And please just consider the impact that a study like this may have down the line for the well-being of the incarcerated population and as well as the individuals who are legally involved that really struggle with mental health and maybe some mental illness that um, historically have been kind of cast to the side. And this is kind of society's opportunity to really look at those shortcomings and really improve their circumstances to improve their well-being. And like I kind of previously said on the other slide, it will really benefit society as a whole as well. So thank you for taking the time to hear out this proposal.